Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's jump into today's episode. Well, folks, we have Teresa Rand here, who I know from a group that we're in through Brielle Cotterman. And I'm so excited to be talking to you more, Teresa, because you've got such a robust experience and you've done so many different things in your life that I know that the people listening are going to get a lot out of this. So I'll turn it over to you. Tell us about yourself.
Wow, where do I start? There's a whole lot of years to fill you in on, Karen. But I will start with what I do now, and I'm guessing
Great.
that we will work backwards in some of our conversation. Currently, I am in Florida. I am a Georgia girl, if you can't figure that out already. Originally from the state of Georgia, but have been in Florida for over 20 years with my career moved me here. But I currently run Teresa Rand Consulting, which is a consulting firm that works with companies using personality assessments to go in and help. It's mostly management teams deal
Sure.
with any obstacles to communicating to each other. So I use a personality assessment because I think before we can communicate effectively, we first need to know about ourselves. Then we can learn about those around us. So that's what I do now in Teresa Rand Consulting. Prior to that, I was 30 years with the YMCA. And
Wow.
my last 10 years as the CEO of an association in Florida, and had a great career with the Y, but just decided wanted to do something different. So hired a coach, developed a business plan, and 5 years later, here we are.
I love it. I love that you said you hired a coach. Okay, there's so many things in there that I want to I want to go back to. You know you're speaking my language when we talk about effective communication.
You're right.
So what would you say, because that really sparks interest in me, specifically around barriers. So what would you say is the biggest barrier related to communication among teams?
One of the phrases I'm known for and that I use a lot is it's not personal.
Ah,
We spend so much time thinking that someone is directing their conversation to just it's about me, where it's really not about me. It's about them and what they're trying to get into my ears from
hmm
their mouth. And
hmm
the more I know about my own communication style, and then if I'm in a close team, if I can learn about their communication style, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir with you, but we have a better understanding is that you're not developing your communication the way you think I want to hear. It's just how you communicate. Now, I want them to change it a little bit, knowing how somebody else hears. And that's the whole premise of knowing your personality. And DISC is I use DISC a lot. I use Gallup Strengths a lot. And then I have another one called the Code Breaker, which is a really fun one. But
Ooh,
it depends on the organization and what they're looking for.
okay. What's your favorite when you think about it?
My favorite assessment, or let me not say my favorite, but the one I use the most
Okay.
um, is the disc,
Okay.
because the disc tells you how you are at work, how you are at home, and then what's the difference between the two. Because if there, so there's three different graphs, because if the difference between how you are at work and home is drastic, you're probably not a happy person at work.
Ah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And then I
And
imagine,
there's basic business etiquette. Of course, we don't, sit on the couch and eat bonbon. Although in the hybrid workforce, we may be doing some of that, but, we have to show up dressed and appropriate and things that, we don't necessarily have to do at home. But our basic personalities should not have to change when we walk through the doors at work or in today's world when we get on the Zoom.
sure. And what a relief that that is. I mean, I love that you're bringing that message into the universe in
Right.
general because so many of us, and I think of so many women listening and including myself, were focused on pleasing everybody else and oh, I have to, be
Oh,
this chameleon or I have to
right.
alter myself to twist up in knots just to be,
Exactly. Right.
whatever this person wants me to be.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think that
And
that's fantastic. Yeah.
absolutely. And understanding maybe, and I say this a lot, I'm asking you to change how you communicate to be more reflective of the other person, but we're not asking you to change who you are.
That's a
We just
great distinction.
understand we're different. But if I
Yes.
can tweak it a little better or a little bit based on your personality, then you're going to hear me and we're going to have much better communication.
That's
But
so
not changing who we are. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's such a good example of flexing to the needs of our audience. That is something that I talk
Exactly.
about all the time is that
Right.
yeah, if you have a message that doesn't land and isn't relevant, they're going to tune you out anyway. So
Wasted your breath.
right, exactly. Well, thinking about you and where you started, did you I mean, you were the CEO of the YMCA for a long time.
Mhm.
Did you expect as a kid, did you say, I want to be a CEO one day?
I didn't. That's a great question, Karen. I actually, when I first started thinking about college, I wanted to do psychology or English. Those were the two things.
Oh.
And if my mother's listening, mother, it's okay. But they were like, what can you do with a psychology and an English degree?
That's what I
But
have.
all our parents do the best they can. And and so what did I do? I decided to not go to college at all and I got married.
I love it.
I said, well, I'll show you.
So
So,
that's interesting. Was that kind of an "I'll show you" thing?
when I look back, I'm not sure it was that intentional. I
Okay.
had a boyfriend, high school boyfriend that I was madly in love with. He was 4 or 5 years older than me. He was already working, and my mom had moved for her career, so
Okay.
she wanted me to move to another city. And at 18, I didn't want to leave my friends. That was the most important thing in the world, right? 17.
Mhm.
So I just said, well, I'll get married, and we did. I graduated in June and was married the following year.
Wow.
So not something I recommend,
Okay.
you know.
Well,
Uh,
and how yeah, talk about that transition then. So you said it's not something you recommend, but how did you then pivot from that or not pivot from that, but reconcile that?
right. Well, by the time I was 28, I had 3 children and no education. And I went back to work. Someone invited me to the YMCA to take a group exercise. Back then it was aerobics.
Yes.
And so 2 of my children were in school. So I took the baby and we went. Anyway, long story short, they hired me to teach aerobics and I worked
Ah,
part time. And I quickly realized I loved working. I had been a stay at home mom because I had 3 kids back to back. And I loved working. And my husband wasn't so thrilled with that idea, that
oh,
little bit of independence. So
okay.
make a long story short, we ended up divorced. I found
Mhm.
myself working full time about probably 2 years before we divorced and realized at that point I wanted to be a CEO. I knew from that point, within 5 years of my career, I wanted to run a YMCA association, but I had to have a college degree.
Aha. So were you teaching aerobics for that 5 years?
Nope, I taught
No.
aerobics for a year, and then they asked me to run the childcare department, and I joke with my boss at the time, who I'm still friends with, my qualifications were the mother of 3 children, being the mother of 3 children. And I love my children, but I did not like working in childcare at all. Uh,
Ah,
I did that for a year and basically told my boss, I'll do it, but could you find somebody else? I want to go back to the fitness side and the membership side. I loved working with the members. So they allowed me to do that. They moved me over full time. And within 2 years, I was um supervising both membership, fitness, wellness, the whole everything but childcare.
so how did you okay, so now let's talk about the
Yeah.
degree. How did that happen or how did you end up being the CEO?
Yeah. Well, when I knew that if I wanted to take on that role, that I was going to have, I mean, that was just a rule. You couldn't become an executive director or CEO of Y without a degree. That was a national policy.
Mhm.
And my CEO at the time would pay for us to take one Y course a year. In the Y, you have to have all these courses to be a director. It's a long process. And what I said to him is that if he would allow me, my mother lived in Jacksonville, which was where the Big Y Association was. So I said, if you will pay for 2 classes a year for me on the Y side of things, I can go stay with my mom. So you're still paying less for me than you are people that you have to put up in a hotel. So I negotiated that
Ooh, nice.
so that I could get my Y credentials at the same time I put myself back through college. And I went to a junior college. Again, I had a great CEO and he knew my goals. I shared with him what I wanted to do. The junior college was literally, Karen, 1 mile from the Y. And
Oh,
this was before internet, before online classes. You actually had to physically go to class.
how
So every
convenient.
day in the middle of the afternoon, which is a slow time for the Y, because people work out in the morning before work, after work, I would go take a class and come back to work and do homework when the kids went to bed, study for test at 3 in the morning. But took me a long time,
Oh,
7 years, but I finally
but
got
you
it.
did it.
I did it. I
That's
finally got it.
wonderful. Talk
So
about grit.
yeah, and just trying to figure out how to work it all in.
What did you end up getting your degree in?
I have a business bachelor of science in business administration.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Wonderful.
And then stopped short of getting my MBA. But after 7 years, and I did get the CEO job, I was like, you know what? I think I'm done. So I was studying one weekend, and that's all I ever did on the weekends was study. And I finally just put my papers up and said, I'm done. I'm done. Kind of wish I'd have finished those last 4 or 5 classes, but I didn't. So here I am.
Here you are, and you've got a
Uh,
lot of success
right.
to prove it. And
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that. I mentioned grit. I don't know if that's what
Uh,
you would call it, but what would you call the, I mean, I think about the fact that you went through a divorce, which must have been really hard. And especially I love the fact that you realized, oh, I love working.
Right.
And I feel like that is such an important thing to know about yourself, going
Right.
back to what you said much earlier. But can you talk a little bit about that transition? How did you just talk about the grit or determination in that
You know
season?
what I have, and in my career in the Y, whenever I had the opportunity, this is the word I always told my team members, my employees, my staff members, that was the most important word to me was discipline. Discipline.
Ah,
I figured out early on because I actually didn't think I was smart enough to go back to college. And
really?
I was a fair student in high school because if you made below B's, if anything dropped to a C, we got in trouble at home. And I was a cheerleader and I played softball, so you had to keep your grades up. So I did what I had to do to get by in high school. But I was scared to death to go back to college. I just didn't think I was
Mm.
smart enough. And at the time, I was 36 years old. And I remember thinking I was really old, which when you're sitting in a classroom with 18-year-olds, that is relatively old, at least to them it is.
Mhm.
But once I got to that first class or two and realized the discipline of showing up and doing your homework was really all it took. It
Mm.
I mean, you had to study, you had to, I wasn't getting my PhD or my MD or lawyer, but at the same time, I think even those degrees require discipline, do the work, show up and
Absolutely.
do the work. And that's been my favorite word my entire adult career life is
Show
discipline.
up and discipline. Yeah.
Show up and do the work.
Love it. That's a great one. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what we'll title this episode. That's
I like that. And
awesome.
everything, it takes discipline in everything, our whole
Yes.
life.
Mhm.
Raising our children, I mean, the whole thing. It just,
Yeah.
you got to
Well,
just show up and do it.
such an important skill. And isn't it interesting that a lot of times there isn't even that much work that we have to do, not to undermine anything that you've shared,
Exactly.
but the point of showing up and simply saying, I'm here, I'm ready,
Right.
is so, so
Right.
important.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
yeah,
to go with your theme is showing up with a level of confidence, which is easier said than done, depending
that
on
is
where we are.
true.
Right.
So, how did you find your confidence to show up?
I was surrounded by some really great people.
Mhm.
And the two people I mentioned, the one that the associate exec that originally took a chance and hired me, and then the exec, they saw in me what I was capable of long before I did. Long before I did. And they knew I didn't have the degree, but they kept giving me more and more responsibility
Yeah.
when I wasn't even sure why,
Ah.
but when they did, I was like, okay, I'll do it. If you think I can do it, I'll do it. I'll show up and do it.
You show up and you did. That's such a great
um,
example. I mean,
yes.
let's
So,
think about that for a second, Teresa, because you could have said no.
right.
No, thank you. You could have thought, "Oh, who am I to be doing that?" I mean, all of that. I love that. I'm hearing another theme, which
Yeah,
is saying yes.
absolutely. And with the work you do with women, women often don't believe that they can even apply for a job, much less do it if they don't check all the boxes.
Right.
Where men will apply and take the job even if they don't check all the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I don't, women tend to do that. We think we
Yeah.
already have to have that goal. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean we can go in not knowing anything or not, doing our homework and research and learning what to do. But yeah, I had people that believed in me long before I believed in myself. Absolutely. And my mother. My mother always worked my entire life, and
Mm.
she's been and still is a huge role model. She worked till she's 79. She's
Oh
80,
my gosh.
had two different careers. So she
That's
was working when
amazing.
working wasn't the norm for moms back
Boy, what
in
an
the day.
incredible example.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about her for a second. What would you say is the number one thing that she passed on to you that you're most proud of or most grateful for?
Ooh, there's so many. But it related to confidence and career, she she would always just give little tidbits that I don't even know and she probably did do it intentionally, but like when I got my first professional job, she said keep a jacket hanging on the back of the door because often you're going to be
Ah,
the only woman in the room and you want to dress the part. Thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore. But it was little advice like that. And I
yeah.
actually have on my desk this little metal high heel shoe
Oh,
that
cute.
she bought herself. It's probably been 50 years ago now when she got her first executive job. And when I got my first executive job, she gave me this shoe. And,
Oh, and
she
for those
just,
of you that are listening, it's like, what would
yeah,
you
it's a
call it? A
little,
brass
yeah, a
copper?
little brass,
Yeah.
like paperweight shoe, if you're
Yeah.
listening. Yeah.
So
It's
cute.
literally a paperweight and it probably is 50 years old at least, but
That's
because she's had it a long
amazing.
time. But she always instilled confidence in my brother and I.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
was nothing we wanted to do except get a psychology degree. And she now realizes you can do a lot more with a psychology degree. But
Yes.
sorry, mom.
Yeah, mom, I'm living proof of that.
Right. I
That's
know,
mine.
right? I love
Psych and
that.
English. Well, tell us about when you think about you've got so much strength of character and you've had all these amazing roles. What would you say is the most critical character trait that you have that has helped you in being confident?
Ooh, that's the most critical character trait is probably the will to, I've already talked about showing up and discipline, but it's about for me, it's about being coachable and
Uh-huh.
understanding that you don't know it all and that that's okay, but to always do the right thing. You know,
That's a great one.
we
Yeah.
hear people say, act like you, what's the saying? Fake it till you make it.
Oh, yeah,
And
act as if. Mhm.
yeah, and there's some truth in that, but you can't
Mhm.
fake it to the point of where you're afraid to ask for help.
Oh, that's such a good distinction.
Those
That's
are
so
two different
important.
things.
Well, one of the first things that you said that struck me is when you said I had a lot of support around me. And so many of us, men and women, don't want to ask for help. We feel
Right.
like we need to, we've got this. You see those things, oh, I've got this.
Exactly.
And yet, if we think about it, we've all had help and we've had introductions and connections and all the things
Absolutely.
for sure. Well,
Yeah, one of the most fun stories I tell is my next door neighbor was a school teacher, and I ran for a long time. I completed a lot of marathons, and so I'd get up in the morning and go
amazing.
meet my friends at the Y. But Miss Joy, who's still a family friend, would always, she knew I was gone for that hour. And then I would take the phone. My daughter by this time was 12, and I'd take the cordless phone. They didn't have cell phones. And put it by her pillow before I left in the morning. So the lady at the front desk at the Y would call her, get her up. She'd get her brother and sister up. By the time I got home, all I had to do was cook breakfast and off we went.
What? Oh,
So it was, I mean, I could not have done anything
that
without
is incredible.
people. That people and Joy loved doing it. My kids loved her. She loved them. I knew they were
Oh.
fine. I mean, we were a stone's throw, literally right out the door was her. So
Well, and that's such a great example of what you said there just a moment ago, that people love to help.
they do.
And isn't it funny how so many of us are we don't want to ask for help,
Right.
but if we can think about, hey, you're giving someone an
Giving,
opportunity to serve.
absolutely, Karen.
Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
such a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about, I know you started talking a little bit about the work that you're doing now, but tell us a little bit more about that and what your favorite part of it is, like who you serve and what you do.
I do some individual coaching. I usually keep 2 or 3 individual clients that are trying to I call it career clarity coaching. So
Oh, that's
they're
great.
trying to figure out, it doesn't mean they're not happy in their job. I talked to a young lady today who's happy in her job, but she knows she wants to do something different down the road. So we'll
Sure.
spend 3 or 4 months together figuring out what's her perfect environment, what's the kind of people she wants to be with, what's her reality, where does she want to go? I use a proprietary method called Rand. Not very creative. That's my last name.
Oh, hey, it's
It's an
good branding.
exercise. The R is, what is your current reality? The A is or the R is what is your current reality and what do you want to change about your current reality? The A is what actions do I need to take? The N is what do I need? Education,
Oh, that's
skills,
great.
money. And then the D is what's my desired outcome. So we work through that RAND exercise to figure out what their next logical step might be. And then
That's so beautiful.
I mentioned the work I do with teams using the personality assessments.
Mm.
And then I do a women's conference every year. This is the
Yes.
third year.
Tell us about
And
that.
it's coming up in September. And when you give my website in your show notes, all that's everything I just talked about is on that one website,
Perfect.
teresarandconsulting.com. But in September, we do a conference. This is our third annual Women's Leadership Conference. And our theme this year is called To Lead, Lead. It is a book that was written by a woman that we know, Pegeen.
Yes.
Her name is Pegeen Echevarria, but she just goes by Pegeen. She's an award-winning international speaker, and she's our keynote. And then we have a chief people person, which is a fancy name for an HR director of a Fortune 800 company, coming as our second keynote to really talk about this new world we're all working in post-COVID.
That
So,
sounds like an incredible lineup.
and the
Really
bonus is
incredible.
it's on Daytona Beach at a brand new hotel. So it's a Thursday, Friday. You can stay the whole weekend at the reduced hotel rate and spend a little time on the beach.
Wonderful. And that's September 15th, right?
September 14th, 15th, Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll
All right, everybody.
thank
So
you
you
for
heard that.
asking.
It's
Yeah.
in the notes, called To Lead.
Yep.
Sounds absolutely fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, I'm curious to know a little bit more about your personal story. And so I would love to ask you, like, what is your favorite thing? You mentioned marathons. What is your favorite thing to do in your free time now? And has that changed since
Oh,
years
it's
back?
definitely changed. It's no longer marathons, I can assure you. It's been 10 years. I did 11 of them, but it's been 10 years
Ah,
since it's probably been 12 years since the last one now, but who's counting? It's been a while.
incredible.
So I run very little, hips, knees, the old story. And I mostly do yoga now. I love
Okay.
yoga.
Yeah.
I got my certification in yoga a couple years ago. So I
How
was teaching
wonderful.
post-COVID. I had a little studio, but I closed it during COVID, of course. Nobody wanted to be in a hot yoga room when
Yeah.
COVID was running around. So I haven't started it back. But my favorite happy place is to be sitting on my couch with a book. I love to
Oh,
read.
what
I
kind of
love
books do you
to
like?
read.
What's the last one you
I
read?
typically have 2 or 3 books going at the time because before I go to bed, I always am reading a novel of some kind just to
Okay.
shut my brain down. In my car, I always have a business book
Mhm.
going. And now I'm finding I'm listening to more podcasts than I am reading, and I'm not sure I like but that's this year seems to be trending in that direction.
Okay.
I just downloaded one. I love diversity work, so I'm reading one now called White Christian America. It just is fascinating. I read one last year by a young woman that was actually at my conference because I met her through having her on my podcast
Hmm.
called Harness Your Inner CEO.
Ooh.
And that is one of the best business books I've read slash listened to in
Wow.
a long
That
time.
sounds like a great one.
And she's a high powered sales exec, I think for Cisco. She's been back and forth between Dell and Cisco. They keep trading her off,
How
but
nice.
she has her own Power Cat podcast too, and she's an author. And so her book I highly recommend. And
Okay.
yeah,
That's
but I
great.
love to read. That's
I
my happy
love it.
place.
Oh, that's so good to know. Well, tell us, was there something that I haven't asked you yet that you want me to ask you or that you'd like to share?
One of the things that you have a little list you send out to your guests. I was reading over it today, and one of the things on your pre list was tell us about a time when you didn't speak up but wish that you had. And the notes I made prior to today was I remember interviewing for my last position as
Mm,
CEO. And in hindsight, I wish I had spoken up more in the interview. And I could probably say
mm,
this if I really thought back every time I was interviewed, that I wish I had asked more questions. I think so often, actually, I just talked to 2 women this week. They have a book called Glass Walls coming out
ooh,
June 15th. Amy Deal and Leanne Dubinsky, 2 PhDs. And we were talking about how women don't often use their voice as they
mhm,
should. And
mhm.
that's a common theme in their research.
Yeah.
And we take jobs without asking all the questions because we're happy to have the opportunity, as
Uh,
opposed to thinking they should be happy to have us.
right. Right.
And without going into all their book, but they talk about how a lot of times women get CEO roles for businesses that are in trouble because men won't take the job, or whatever. It's a
Mhm.
whole nother topic, Karen, for
Right.
another day. But I think that's something I would have liked to have done more of, is really knowing how to interview and understanding it's a two-way street.
Oh, yes.
Because
Yes.
I'm not, I think I always just sat
Such a
back
good
and answered
reminder.
their questions and
Right.
didn't do enough to ask questions of my own. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean I wouldn't have taken the job, but I
Mhm.
might have been better prepared had I asked more questions up
Yeah, that's a great tip for all
front.
of us. It's so true. And it's such a mindset shift to think, oh, like somebody once told me, it was funny. I think it was years back. Somebody gave me the affirmation to say, people are lucky to be working with Karen Laus.
There you go. Right.
So I do think that that's good. And now I've been able to give that coaching to other people in my network too, to have them say that out loud. Like people are
Absolutely.
lucky or people are fortunate
Right.
to have my time and my energy and the value that I bring. So
Absolutely.
that's a great way to
Yeah.
wrap up.
Yeah.
So Teresa, where can we find you?
You can find me at Teresa, and it has no H. It is Teresa Rand, Rand, teresarandconsulting.com. And you can
Wonderful.
see my individual coaching, my business coaching, a women's group I run here in the eastern part of Florida. And anything else you want to find out? The podcast, I do have my own podcast. The Boss Lady Podcast is the name of it.
Love
And
it.
hope to have you on that soon. But yeah,
Yeah,
everything's easy. My name, consulting.com.
perfect. Excellent, Teresa. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. Really
Thank you
grateful to
for
have
having
you.
me. I knew we would have fun. So thank you.
Good, good. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.